Joining me live is Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, which has been quite busy today with Facebook's revelation about new attacks on the midterms elections. Plus, we have a lot of other news in the Manafort trial. Thanks for being with me tonight.
It's good to be with you.
For people who are following this news as it breaks or who may have heard the top of our show where we had two very qualified experts disagree on the level of intensity, what does this new revelation mean about this attack on the midterms tonight?
Well, I think we need to view this in combination with what we learned just a week ago from Microsoft, and that is that two of the vectors that the Russians used in the last election, they appear to be using again. That is, and we saw this in both of the Mueller indictments, they're using social media surreptitiously to try to divide Americans, to try to accentuate these fault lines in our society. But they're also hacking or attempting to hack political campaigns. And we saw Claire McCaskill was one of the targets of this, and that she was a target the same week that Donald Trump was evidently saying publicly that she needed to be defeated. As an echo of July of the election year in which Donald Trump said publicly, hey, Russians, if you're listening, hack Hillary Clinton's emails, because we learned in the indictment that on that date, in fact, they did try to hack the Clinton campaign. It also appears that they may have been listening.
Respectfully, to push you on that, he would probably be on record against the re-election of most any incumbent Democrat.
Well, that's certainly true, but it also looks like the Russians may have been listening when he called for Claire McCaskill's ouster, because the timing, again, is very suspicious. The timing of that attempted hack of her campaign took place not months after he mentioned Claire McCaskill, and it wasn't like there was a tremendous volume of campaigns that were the subject of attack. According to Microsoft, I think there were only 3, and that was one of them. So the timing is certainly suspicious, but it looks like, because they've identified similar actors to the Russian hackers of the DNC, that the Russians are using both of these modalities, hacking of campaigns, surreptitious social media, again, to influence our elections.
I also want to get your report card here on what is a giant and powerful corporation, Facebook, because in ways that no one, I think, would have predicted many years ago, they have become a key platform and utility, if you will, for how we do democracy and civic discussion in this country. You and others have been critical in the past. I want to read from how Mark Zuckerberg is assessing this tonight. Security isn't a problem that you ever completely solve, but we're learning and improving quickly, too, and we're investing heavily to keep people safe. What grade do you give them, and how true does that statement feel to you, given how much more you know than most of us about all the backroom pressure to get this company to act responsibly?
Well, I think it's still a work in progress, but I'm pleased that they came forward with this announcement today, even if they had to caveat it and say that we can't definitively say this was the Russian government, but there are links to this troll farm in St. Petersburg IRA. That's what we need them to do. We need this to be timely. They refer to events that it appears, again, that these Russian trolls are trying to organize in the United States and victimize real people and get real people involved in protests or counter-protests without knowing that the impetus originates in Russia.
In the real world. So what does it say to you that there are the markings, or the overlap at least, with Russian operations? What does that say to you about this attack we're learning about tonight?
Just what we would expect, which is the Russians aren't going to be so blatant next time. They're not going to use the exact same IP addresses that can be traced back to the very same Russian troll farm. They're going to hide their hand, and Facebook clearly acknowledges that in their statement today, which means that Facebook is going to have to do better sleuthing. But also, as Facebook acknowledges, we need to make sure that our intelligence community is cooperating and there are channels of communication with the tech companies, that there's a free flow of information. And I have to say, I'm concerned that we learned from Microsoft about this attempted hack of these 3 campaigns. They undoubtedly would have informed the FBI or the Department of Homeland Security. I would have thought that we would have been notified in Congress about this. But none of that happened. It didn't go up through the food chain. There wasn't the kind of whole-of-government response that there should be, and that alarms me as we get closer to those midterms.
Does that relate at all to leadership or lack thereof from the Trump administration?
Unquestionably. There are, I think, very good people at the mid-bureaucracy level who are trying their best at the Department of Homeland Security, certainly throughout the intelligence community and at the top of the intelligence community. but there's no one at the very top saying that this is a priority of our administration. You need to work with each other. You need to talk with each other. I want periodic reports. Instead, we got the guy at the top saying this is all a hoax and a witch hunt.
Right, which now tonight feels very real as undercutting something that is actually relevant to how we choose, well, body that you're in, the Congress. We've gone several minutes, Congressman Schiff, without discussing Rudy Giuliani. I would like to rectify that by showing the comments that he made that are both bizarre in how he did it, but relevant in the sense that he's the lawyer for the president talking about a potential meeting that might add culpability. Take a look.
There wasn't another meeting that has been leaked but hasn't been in public yet. Okay. That was a meeting, an alleged meeting, 3 days before. According to Cohen, or according to the leak, he says there was a meeting with Donald Jr., with Jared Kushner, with Paul Manafort, with Gates, and possibly two others, in which they, out of the presence of the president, discussed the meeting with the Russians. We checked with their lawyers, the ones we could check with, which were 4 of the 6. That meeting never, ever took place. It didn't happen.
Is this important in any way, and does your investigation look at whether there were such meetings that would suggest greater culpability about this potential collusion conspiracy?
Well, we certainly tried to look into this, but all too often the majority on our committee was uninterested in getting the answers. So when witnesses stonewalled us and refused to answer, the Republicans were unwilling to subpoena them or compel them. So we weren't allowed to follow the evidence where it was leading. But here you have Giuliani saying, okay, there was a pre-meeting, and then he quickly corrects himself, an alleged pre-meeting. He's all over the map. But I think you can look at the statements that he's been making, along with the president's confirmation of the new defense strategy, collusion is not a crime, and you can see that plainly they feel there is evidence that the president knew in advance that this is what they're worried about, that evidence is going to come forward, that the president knew in advance of the Trump Tower meeting. Shifting to okay, even if there was collusion, even if the president was involved in collusion, it's not a crime. But of course, the crime is conspiracy, so they're playing a word game. But nonetheless, I think this kind of throw everything you can at the wall strategy of Rudy Giuliani doesn't really serve the president's interest very well, but it is telling. The only other point I would make on this is that I think that they're clearly spooked by Michael Cohen, and they're making the leaks, not Michael Cohen, it seems, at least as far as this pre-meeting is concerned. Yeah. And I have to imagine that they might have gotten this information if there had been a joint defense of some kind with Michael Cohen and these other counsel that Michael Cohen has now opted out of, because it seems to be they're very specific about this pre-meeting, that they're, 6 members or 8 members, and they've talked to 4 of the 6 or 6 of the 8. They're using a great many particulars, and they clearly, I think, want to try to get this out there and minimize it before Michael Cohen does. But I just don't see that it's going to be all that effective a defense strategy.
Well, that's the weird part. Rudy Giuliani's insisting this dinner never took place, but everyone had sushi. Congressman.